Most people don't realize that disliking guests has very little to do with being rude, antisocial, or unfriendly. Psychology explains why some people feel genuine stress, irritation, or exhaustion the moment someone enters their home. This reaction isn't random. It's deeply tied to how the brain processes safety, control, and emotional energy. By the end of this breakdown, you'll understand why certain people hate having guests over, what's happening in their nervous system, and why this preference often signals self-awareness rather than selfishness. You may even recognize parts of yourself in ways that feel unexpectedly validating. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. For some people, home is not just a place to live, it's a psychological sanctuary. It's where the nervous system finally powers down after managing the outside world. When guests enter that space, the brain doesn't interpret it as neutral, it interprets it as intrusion. The human brain is constantly scanning for safety. When you're outside, your brain is in performance mode. You monitor tone, body language, and social expectations. At home, that vigilance drops. Your posture changes, your breathing slows, your guard comes down. For people who hate having guests over, the presence of others prevents that shutdown from happening. This isn't about disliking people, it's about losing access to recovery. Imagine finishing a long day and realizing you won't be able to fully relax until everyone leaves. That creates quiet resentment, not because guests did anything wrong, but because the brain feels trapped in alert mode. Here's a reflective question. When you imagine someone coming over unexpectedly, do you feel excitement or a tightening in your chest? One of the strongest drivers behind this reaction is control. Home represents predictability. You know where everything is. You control noise, lighting, movement, and timing. Guests disrupt that system. Even polite guests create unpredictability. They move differently, speak differently, and change the emotional temperature of the space. For brains that value order and internal calm, this unpredictability creates stress. Not dramatic stress, but low-grade tension that doesn't turn off. The person hosting may smile and engage, but internally they're counting minutes, tracking energy, and waiting for relief. This is why some people clean obsessively before guests arrive. It's not about impressing others, it's about regaining a sense of control before it's lost. Order reduces cognitive load. Mess increases it. When guests are present, the brain compensates by tightening structure. There's also the issue of emotional labor. Hosting requires constant micro-adjustments. You monitor whether people are comfortable, entertained, fed, and included. Even silence becomes something to manage. For people with high empathy or social awareness, this drains energy fast. They're not thinking, I don't want you here. They're thinking, I have to be on the entire time. That pressure can feel overwhelming, especially for people whose jobs already demand emotional performance. Here's a surprising insight. Many people who hate having guests over are excellent hosts. They anticipate needs, remember preferences, and create welcoming environments. That skill comes at a cost. The more attuned you are to others, the harder it is to relax around them. Now let's talk about boundaries. Some people have porous emotional boundaries. They absorb moods, tension, and dynamics without trying to. When guests bring stress, noise, or emotional baggage into the home, it gets absorbed. The brain doesn't separate self from environment easily. In these cases, guests don't just visit physically, they visit emotionally. That's exhausting. The person hosting may feel drained for hours or even days afterwards without fully understanding why. Think about this. After guests leave, do you feel relieved but also depleted? Another factor is identity safety. Home is where people drop social roles. You're not an employee, friend, or partner in the same way. You're just you. Guests reintroduce roles: host, entertainer, conversationalist. That shift can feel jarring. For people who value authenticity, being watched in their most unfiltered space feels uncomfortable. It's not shame, it's exposure. The brain reads it as vulnerability without consent. This is especially true for people who grew up without privacy. If your boundaries were crossed early in life, your brain may strongly protect personal space now. Guests, even welcome ones, activate that protective response. Here's where misunderstandings happen. Society frames hospitality as a moral trait. If you don't enjoy hosting, you're labeled cold or unfriendly. But psychology tells a different story. Preference for solitude and controlled environments often correlates with emotional depth, sensitivity, and self-regulation. Now, let's address introversion, but carefully. This isn't just about being introverted. Plenty of introverts enjoy guests in small doses. The key difference is how quickly someone's nervous system reaches overload. Some brains recharge through stimulation, others recharge through reduction, quiet, familiarity, low demands. Guests add stimulation no matter how pleasant they are. There's also the issue of time distortion. When people hate having guests, time can feel slowed down, minutes stretch. The brain is waiting for an endpoint. That waiting creates impatience, not because the person dislikes company, but because their internal resources are running out. At work, this shows up as preferring remote roles or independent tasks. In relationships, it shows up as needing alone time to reset. In social life, it shows up as carefully rationing interaction. Here's another reflective moment. Do you feel like yourself only when you're alone at home? Let's talk about guilt because it plays a big role. Many people force themselves to host because they should. That internal conflict makes the experience worse. The brain is managing guests and suppressing resentment at the same time. Suppressing emotions requires energy. The more you suppress, the faster burnout arrives. Over time, this can turn into avoidance. Invitations get delayed, visits get shorter, not because of dislike, but because self-preservation takes over. Here's an important distinction. Wanting people in your life is different from wanting them in your space. Some people prefer connection outside the home, cafes, walks, neutral territory. These environments allow social interaction without sacrificing recovery zones. This preference often gets misinterpreted as distance. In reality, it's strategic closeness. It allows connection without depletion. Now consider attachment styles, without labels. People who value autonomy often struggle with prolonged closeness in confined spaces. The brain associates freedom with safety. Guests reduce freedom temporarily, even if they're loved. This doesn't mean intimacy is threatening, it means autonomy is non-negotiable. The home becomes the last line of defense for that autonomy. Here's a pattern interrupt. Think about how different it feels to meet someone outside versus having them sit on your couch. Another layer is sensory sensitivity. Noise, smells, movement, and clutter increase when guests are present. For some nervous systems, this is overwhelming. They may not consciously notice it, but their body does. Their shoulders tense, their breathing changes, their patience drops. The brain is managing too much input at once. What's fascinating is that many people who hate having guests are deeply loyal friends. They show up in emergencies, they offer help quietly. They just prefer doing it on their terms. This brings us to the core insight. Disliking guests is rarely about rejection, it's about regulation. The brain is protecting energy, identity, and calm. When you understand this, the shame lifts. You stop forcing yourself into roles that don't fit. You start designing social lives that respect your wiring. For those who love hosting, this understanding builds empathy. You stop taking it personally. You realize preferences aren't judgments. So here's the reframe. A home isn't just a social space, it's a psychological tool. Some people need it quiet, some need it shared. Neither is superior. The real problem starts when people ignore their needs to meet expectations. That's when resentment grows. That's when relationships strain. If you hate having guests, the solution isn't to change who you are. It's to communicate boundaries clearly and kindly, to offer alternatives, to protect the space that keeps you grounded. And if you love having guests, the solution is curiosity. Ask what makes others comfortable. Don't assume avoidance means rejection. Let's pause for one final reflection. What does your ideal home environment look like and why? Because once you understand the psychology behind this preference, it stops being a flaw. It becomes information about how your mind works, about how you recover, about how you connect. If this explanation helped you see yourself or others more clearly, take a moment to reflect on your own boundaries. Share your perspective if it feels right. And if you want to keep exploring the quiet psychology behind everyday behavior, stay connected.